can say definitively that religions are all bullshit.
Welcome to Brainstorm.
We have the explicit tag for a reason.
This is a base level argument to a higher level morality.
I get paid to science?
To science as much as one can science.
What the hell was my point?
Trigger warning. The Brainstorm podcast will criticize your most cherished beliefs. We attack nonsense in all its forms and discuss difficult subjects. If you peddle pseudoscience, supernatural woo, or religious dogma, then this is not your safe place. This is the home of hardcore skepticism.
Hi and welcome to the Brainstorm Podcast Skeptic Studio, where we do interviews, major topics, and news related to skepticism and atheism. I'm your host, Corey, and this is an extra episode of the Skeptic Studio. In this one, I talked to Eiynah Nicemangos. She was recently the recipient of Canadian Atheists Person of the Year. She's a feminist, ex-Muslim, and a left-leaning podcaster who calls out dishonesty whenever she sees it. It was a real honor to speak to her, and I hope to have her on someday with the full crew, because this conversation was a lot of fun, and I'm sure she'd fit in great with the rest of our crew. With that, I guess I'm just going to pass it over to the interview. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the Brainstorm Skeptic Studio.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit because you recently were awarded Canadian Atheists Person of the Year. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know it's just an informal type thing, but for us Canadian atheists, I think almost all of the people I know follow that page. So it's a thing that is well known.
Cool. Yeah, I was pretty surprised because I was under the impression that I was one of the most unpopular atheists because, you know, as the movement shifts rightwards, obviously people that don't shift along with it fall out of step.
Yeah, for sure. There's, I don't know, there seems to be almost two movements, right? The SJWs and the anti-SJWs. So
yeah, I mean, that's kind of how culture in general is now too, right? But the atheist scene seems sort of heavily on the anti-SJW side. And I mean, I remember like a couple of years ago when, you know, things weren't like as Nazi-esque, you know, like as Trumpy. It was, you know, it wasn't that uncommon for leftists even to be like, okay, well, you know, some of these SJWs have gone too far and they want trigger warnings for like, you know, pomegranate seeds and pictures of spiders, things like that. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't such a big deal to be anti-SJW, but now it's taken on a whole different meaning, and it's pretty icky.
Yeah, it is pretty icky. I don't know. So I guess something I wanted to start off with was kind of how you got started in the atheist movement, because I've kind of known about you in the periphery for a few years. You were once, when you first started Polite Conversations, I think you were doing it with, Paul Sading at the time.
Yeah.
And that kind of, I'm not sure what the story is behind what happened there, but, then you guys split up, and then you've kind of been always active, but, I guess I just didn't pay attention to your stuff until the last couple of years, or last year, about 2017. You had Thomas Smith and Andrew Torres on your show to talk about free speech, and I really enjoyed it. So I wonder, I guess, can you give me a bit about your background? How did Polite Conversations get started, and how did you get to where you are now with the blog and the almost famous YouTubers that you're having on quite often?
Well, so basically, I just started off as blogger who wanted to write about sexuality in Pakistan. So I had just come back to Toronto after living there for a couple of years, and I had, started gathering some news firsthand and discovered some really, startling trends, and started to realize how little people knew about sexuality in general, just the basic stuff,
Right.
So I started writing about that and tried to make a conscious effort to actually minimize my distaste for religion, because I was speaking mostly to a Pakistani audience. Like, obviously I still talked about, how conservative religiosity always pissed me off, and how, that it became harder and harder to separate conversations about sexuality from the effects that religion was having on sexuality in Pakistan. So even though I didn't really believe in religion, I tried to I tried to steer clear of that. Also because I knew of, how dangerous that can be when speaking to a Pakistani audience, even though I started off anonymous, thankfully. But then it just, it became harder and harder to talk about it. And one day I was like writing about homophobia in Pakistan, and I was already accused of being, blasphemous, how I should be killed and things. So I was like, you know what? I'm already being accused of all these things, so I might as well just be open about my views on religion and how I'm a complete non-believer. And then it became, I became more and more open about that. And then I became involved in the ex-Muslim movement, and I was very vocal in that too. But then I started seeing the ex-Muslim movement shifting from what I considered were my humanist values and going more towards the anti-Muslim side, and aligning with many like politically right-wing or far-right even, some of them going on Breitbart or Rebel Media, completely proving critics of ex-Muslim right, which was really appalling. So now I'm at this strange place where, I don't know, it's a lonely path to walk, I guess, right? You're like a left-leaning ex-Muslim.
Right. It's, I guess the rare is what it seems to be. Like you say, most of the ex-Muslims that I have followed in the past, I eventually actually kind of had to stop following a lot of them because
I don't blame you.
Yeah, it become, pretty problematic and pretty like anti-feminist and like, I don't know, very, a little cozy with some of the, some of the bigotry that was being handed down to, people who are still Muslim, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at people that are happily associating with people like Rubin, happily promoting people like Rubin, but then criticize the left for associating with people like Linda Sarsour or Reza Aslan, I mean, I just don't see how you have any sort of high ground to do that.
Right.
It just, the hypocrisy is too much. Like, I'm happy to criticize the left when it's wrong, but I would also like to see the reverse, right? Like, criticize the right when it's wrong, and criticize fellow atheists when they're associating with the right. People always say the right things. They'll say like, oh, we condemn anti-Muslim bigotry. But if you observe their acts, it's a different story.
Right. Yeah, it's almost, I don't know, it's an interesting phenomenon. Like, people who used to, I think I saw a tweet this morning actually, where it was like, these people who are now atheists, who are kind of the pro-Rubin, pro-Jordan Peterson types, if Kent Hovind or Ken Ham came out against SJWs, they'd be on board with them. Like, just discard their previous values in favor of whatever this new fad is.
Yeah, it's so hollow, right? I mean, if you can abandon your values and your principles just to go after what you consider a common enemy as leftists and feminists, firstly, I mean, I think it's troubling that is your number one high priority enemy in this political climate.
Yeah.
And then the fact that they're joining hands with people like Dennis Prager and Jordan Peterson, people that they themselves would have laughed out of the room just a couple of years ago when it was trendier to, dunk on religious people. Now,
right. Yeah. Yeah, it is really like following trends, right? Like whatever the most popular speakers are saying, that's what they're following, I guess.
Yes, and meanwhile calling themselves free thinkers.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So, what do you think is going on with atheists and Jordan Peterson? I know you've kind of been at the forefront of shooting down his nonsense, but how is this a guy that atheists get behind at all?
Well, I think that we're all, we have to come out of this impression that atheists are generally going to be liberal and left-leaning and progressive, because clearly that's not the case. Maybe in the wider sense of the word, like people that don't identify with movement atheism, maybe that is true. Atheists do tend to lean, left and be progressive. And
right.
It used to be about fighting the religious right, and now it's about holding hands with the religious right and playing footsie with them. So to dunk on feminists, I honestly, I don't know where or how it's come. I think that in some cases there have been like personal grievances with the left where they got stuff on Islam wrong and they've maybe wrongfully accused someone of being racist. But I still don't see how that could cause you to abandon all your values and promote cavemen like Jordan Peterson, who could really set us back and who are really actually regressive.
Yeah, that's right. It's like people who are pushing for progress are being accused of being regressive, and I just don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, there is a faction on the left, certainly, that, will say ridiculous things or,
yeah,
out of their anti-racist intent will say stuff like, I won't date white people and stuff like that. So that does become regressive in a way, right? Like,
right.
They may want to be anti-racist, but in that way, they're not too different from the alt-right if they're anti-mixed relationships,
Right. Or, I mean, there is a segment of feminism that's pretty problematic when discussing trans people and.
Sure. And like hijabs, right? They'll celebrate Islamic modesty garments, again, out of the intent of wanting to shield vulnerable minority groups, but it ends up definitely being regressive and championing religious patriarchy and things like that.
Right.
So in one sense, it used to make sense, but now it's become such an overused term and so blanketly applied to anyone that is left of Richard Spencer.
Yeah. The Overton window, I guess, is way over to the right at this point.
Right. Way over.
So what was the first time you actually heard of Jordan Peterson?
With that whole Bill C-16 thing, I remember doing a podcast with Callie Wright. That was around the time I had started hearing of him. And if you go back and listen to that one on my show, I think it's like panel discussion 5 or something. I speak about him in terms of, not really knowing him, but saying, what he said on TV sounds pretty reasonable. Maybe I just don't know enough. Maybe he's misrepresenting the law. Now that I know so much more, yeah, for sure. I can't speak about him in that way anymore.
Right. Yeah. It's, I don't know. The Wayward Atheists, did a show about him back, I don't know, it must be almost a year ago now. And I had never heard of him before. So I listened to that show and I was like, oh, well, who's this guy who doesn't believe in free speech for atheists and doesn't, he's like, why are any atheists on board with this guy? And then I saw some of the Bill C-16 stuff and it, slowly but surely the case against him seemed so strong that I couldn't believe that people weren't changing their minds.
And this is the group of people that specifically prides themselves on the ability to change their minds when new evidence becomes available. But they are just as ideologically blind or dogmatic as any group, including theists. I mean, They just replace their prophets with these terrible figureheads, and you cannot say a word against them. You cannot even use Jordan Peterson's own quotes to hold him accountable for his words, because, you know, then you'll be accused of not knowing his entire body of work, or not, of taking him out of context. These are the same bloody arguments that theists have used against atheists trying to reason with people about how certain parts of scripture are pretty misogynistic or pretty bigoted. And they'll be like, no, but it's not in context. You have to take the whole of the book. It's like, no, well, some things have to stand up on their own. Yeah, for sure. You can't say some of the things he said about truth that and still attack postmodernists and not be contradictory or self-contradictory. He's so self-contradictory. I mean, he's held up as a free speech advocate, and he's, you know, called for entire fields of study to be shut down. Like, or he uses the language of the Red Scare in a sense, and then he's the guy who wants a list of professors who say things that he doesn't like. Yeah, exactly. And he's held up as a free speech warrior. He had this free speech event where he deplatformed, you know, now open ethno-nationalist Faith Goldie because he watched her interview with a Nazi-associated podcast right after Charlottesville, where she made fun of Jewish stereotypes and stuff. And he found it, you know, he found that she was not adequate in questioning their beliefs and stuff. Meanwhile, he went on neo-Nazi Tara McCarthy's YouTube show and did not question her at all. So, yeah, same philosophy or ideology, but one person gets deplatformed and the other one he supports, eh? Yeah, because he doesn't hold himself up to the same standards that he holds other people up, right? Yeah. Whereas if it was a leftist deplatforming Faith Goldie for anything, these people would have been outraged. Right. But because it's them, they were all making excuses. Even Gad Saad was like, oh, you don't have to invite everybody to the dinner table. And, you know, just like shit that people have been saying all this time. But when it's when it's leftists, it's a problem. Yeah. So I guess, kind of just to shift gears a little bit, what do you think one of the arguments that I've heard a lot of anti-feminists say is that feminists in the Western world are complaining about gendered streetlights and whatnot, while women in Muslim countries are facing what they quote unquote real oppression. So I wonder, are there movements in Muslim countries for feminism, or is there something that you know of that Western feminists are doing to support those movements, or is there a counter to that argument? There's plenty of counters to that argument. Firstly, I mean, we could use the same argument for free speech against them. Like, you know, they're like worried about campus SJWs screaming too loud about their terrible, campus speeches. Meanwhile, people in the Middle East have the real struggle for free speech. So this is just frivolous nonsense. And secondly, it's such garbage because they're misrepresenting it. All of Western feminism isn't really about like street lights and silly shit. Of course there is that, but that's not the entirety of it. So there's plenty of important struggles in Western feminism too, especially in the age of, you know, Trump, where there's a man who's a self-proclaimed sex predator who's sitting in the most important and most powerful position in the White House. It's just ridiculous to me. Women are fighting for, you know, reproductive health benefits. Women are fighting for, you know, rapists not to get child custody. So many things. Yeah. So to pit feminists against each other like that, of course there's feminist movements in Saudi Arabia, and of course nobody is comparing. No one's saying that women over here have it just as bad as women under an Islamic theocracy. But always be wary of people who use women in an Islamic theocracy as pawns simply to undermine feminism, because they don't really care about either set of women. And you can hear that from like Saudi feminists themselves. Like I had a couple of Saudi feminists on my show to talk about this very talking point. And surprisingly, living even in Saudi Arabia, they are so well versed in alt-right talking points, and they are so knowledgeable about the Rubens and the Milos, because this stuff impacts them. Right. Ultimately, they say that women fighting for their rights and their freedoms over here inspires them. And it's so true. Even in Pakistan, the Me Too movement over here has inspired women to speak up about their abuse. And it has caused more people to take them seriously. Right.
That's interesting. I mean, I always kind of knew, to some extent, like you can say, well, people care about more than one thing. They can care about a thing over in the West, and they can help support feminists in Islamic countries.
They absolutely do. I mean, when this case of Dina Ali, this Saudi woman who was kidnapped by her uncles and taken away from an airport, I forget all the details. There were tons of Western feminists tweeting about this story, showing solidarity. But it is also at the same time a natural human flaw to take things that are closer to you more seriously, right? We do that in terms of terror attacks as well. And it's actually the right-wingers that get upset when the left-wingers say that, oh, you know, they care more about terrorist attacks and things that are happening closer to them rather than the ones that happen way worse and way more frequently further and further. Those ones don't get as much media coverage. Why is that? Right. That's because we naturally take things that are happening around us seriously at another level. Yeah, yeah.
I used to get in arguments a lot with, back when I used to actually argue about atheism. It would always be Christians who got really offended that I spent a lot of time arguing about Christianity. And it was always, well, that's what's prevalent in my area, so that's what I'm fighting against.
Right, right. Yeah, and you would argue against what you know best, right?
Right, right. Yeah, well, because then otherwise I suppose you'd have to educate yourself first before you could really argue against it, one would expect.
And also, of course, it makes more sense if something is more damaging to your environment that is, you know, around you, then you're gonna focus more on that, right? It doesn't make sense to be living in Saudi Arabia and focus only on neo-Nazism.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, that wouldn't work very well.
I mean, you could do it, but it would just be strange. Why are you so concerned when there's no Nazis there? There's no white supremacy in Saudi Arabia. So in that same vein, like when we criticize Islam in like a Muslim country, so, you know, I have atheist friends in Pakistan, the conversations are so much more frank, so much harsher. Right. Because there is no concern about anti-Muslim bigotry. That's not a thing.
Right, right.
In Pakistan. So people are free, you know, amongst themselves when they are free to criticize Islam. The way they criticize it would not be okay over here, for example.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
I wonder how that plays in like international conversation. Like if somebody who's more in tune with that kind of thing, like do you think that they would get called a bigot or racist or what have you, or is that Islamophobe over here if they said the same thing?
Of course they would. But also you have to have some sort of social awareness yourself, right? You cannot transplant conversations directly from, an environment where anti-Muslim bigotry doesn't exist to an environment where it is a hot topic right now, where it could potentially affect policy, where Trump is trying to, you know, impose a Muslim ban and stuff like that. You cannot transplant those things. It's like me, when I criticize Christianity in a country like Canada, I'm not concerned about Islamist bigots having the power to, set a mob after certain Christians.
Yeah.
But if I go to Pakistan and I, only focus on how evil Christianity is, and I go to like Islamist media to only talk about Christianity, then that's a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, I won't be changing my views on Christianity when I go to Pakistan. I still think it's ridiculous. I'm not a fan.
But it won't be a focus.
Well, of course, I'd also watch what I say. Like, I'm not going to team up with Islamists to bash Christianity.
Right.
Because they don't really have a secular outlook. They have a hate Christians outlook.
Yeah, which I suppose speaks to what we're seeing over here, right? Because
exactly,
yeah, secularists are suddenly siding with Christians because they're anti-Islam.
Yeah, and going on media outlets that stir up hate, like Rebel Media, you cannot do that. Like, if you want to be taken seriously as a humanist, that's not how you criticize Islam. That's not even an effective way to do it, because you're discrediting yourself amongst the mainstream conversation. You're holding it back, actually. Yeah,
no, that sounds pretty accurate to me. So I guess something that's kind of been I've been curious about is how did you get so involved in these conversations online, or I guess because I see a lot of your tweets more than I see other people discussing these things. And was that something that you've just, has your passion for this increased, and so you're just that prolific that you are always working on this as a subject?
As working on what? Like the rightward shift of Islam critics?
Yeah, or atheism turning to the right, and like the centrists and...
Yeah, I think that's a problem. Like, I mean, I'm seriously concerned, and I think it actually puts the conversation around Islam a step back. So until we establish that this is bad, I don't think we can have productive conversations around Islam. So, yeah, I don't see many people speaking about it, and I think that a lot of that is to do with tribalism, and they don't want to criticize their own in-group. But, if I was like that, I wouldn't have really... worried about criticizing the left. I mean, I'm happy to criticize feminists. I have criticized Islam. I've left Islam. So for some people who left Islam, it seems they've only just sort of replaced their extremist ideology, right?
Right.
Especially people who had Islamic extremist backgrounds. Now you see things like red-pilled ex-Muslims joining up with the alt-right.
Eesh.
And their hatred for Islam is so severe that it sort of bleeds onto Muslims. It's not just the ideology. They actually think that, Muslims are untrustworthy, or Muslims lie, or, that you cannot let too many Muslims in, even though they would have been denied entry on the basis of those beliefs. So,
yeah, what do you think of the argument that people present where, they don't like to be called racist because Islam is an ideology. Yeah, not a race.
Yeah, I mean, I think that worked in the early days, maybe like 2013, 2014, when these conversations were just starting. But it's so clear now in the increasing racism in North America, especially, that Islam is being racialized, right? People that are not even Muslim are being targeted for their brown skin and under the assumption that they are Muslim. There was a Hindu man that was killed. There was a Sikh man that was attacked, and it's just constant. So it's really not a good point, I think, to say that Islam, technically it's not a race, but you can absolutely be a racist.
Right. Yeah. Something
criticizing Islam.
Yeah. Something that I've noticed, is people who like you say, like they assume somebody who's a Sikh is a Muslim, because they don't know the difference. Mm-hmm. So what is it about, like, it's this color of their skin that they're judging, right? Like,
exactly.
Or it's the lack of understanding of anything other than their own Western culture, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. What do you, and this is a really bad one that I heard a while back, is like, what do you think of the idea that just Western culture is just superior to Islamic culture?
I mean, Yeah, it's a dog whistle in many ways.
Right.
But, one can argue that secular culture is definitely superior to religious culture, or secular culture is superior to Islamic theocracy culture. It just so happens that racists also love these arguments. So you have to be very careful how you frame them, and you have to be careful that you denounce racism and anti-Muslim bigotry around saying that. So
right.
It's a tricky conversation to have. I don't think that at its core, it's always wrong to say that. Maybe in that phrasing, that's a bit of a dog whistle. But if you put it like, secular culture is better than theocracies or religious culture. But I mean, we're seeing secularism now also shift and become really, I don't know, and sometimes it, aligns with people that are like all about trad life, all about undermining feminism. So I mean, it's like in some ways there's a secularization of the alt-right as well, right?
Right. Yeah. Isn't Richard Spencer an atheist?
Yeah. So you really have to be careful assuming superiority because.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It was something that I heard a while back, and and to me it seemed like, okay, this is kind of obviously something that I can't really argue with, because to some extent I do think that secular governments and secular culture is better for humanity, but the way it was worded, like Western culture is superior. I'm like, oh geez, dude. Like,
you gotta be careful with those phrasings.
We had an anthropologist on Brainstorm a while back who we talked about female circumcision. And we started off the episode very anti-FGM, right? Like, and I mean, I didn't leave the episode being pro-FGM, but he gave me some context around like the way that families might view it, or like
oh no. No, there's no context in which that is okay. No way.
He did an ethnography with a woman who actually grew up in Canada and flew back to her home country and had herself circumcised, I guess, voluntarily. And
that's different, though. When an adult is doing that, they're consenting. That's whatever, people have their penises, I don't know, split in half for some reason, or their tongues. That's up to them when they're adults.
Yeah. Adult consent is kind of a way different thing than doing things to children.
If she wants to remove her clitoris for some reason, then that's up to her. But you know what? A practice that does that to children is abhorrent, and there's no context.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I like I say, I didn't come out of it pro, but he also like,
was this like C.J. Whirlman or something?
No, it was actually an anthropology professor from the U of R here.
Oh,
and he followed. I wish I could remember her name.
See, I mean, this is when the left, I think, I don't know what the hell they're doing, because whatever their intent might be to protect a vulnerable minority, because FGM is also, it becomes a rallying point for racists, just like hijabs and niqab. So people become defensive about these practices. But that's the complete wrong approach. You cannot, as much as you want to defend a vulnerable minority, as noble as that intent is, you cannot start defending these practices. Right. I'm sorry, but it's barbaric and it's not okay.
What did you think of the controversy with I think it was a hijab the woman wanted to wear during her citizen swearing in.
Niqab.
What was it? The niqab? Yeah, like
face veil.
Yeah. What were your thoughts on that?
Oh, that made me very, very angry, actually. And that's when I was completely on the other side of the left.
Oh, okay.
So, so I have kind of like a wider perspective on this, right? I'm very anti-far right, but I'm also very anti-Islamic far right.
Right.
So I look at that as a bigger picture. sometimes the left ends up siding with the Islamic far right, and that's not okay. So people who advocate for face veils and who are so adamant, these are not progressive liberal people with, progressive views. If you asked Zunaira Ishaq what her views are on things, I am sure that you would not be pleased.
All right.
Even in one of her interviews with someone, she did say that she left Pakistan, I believe, because she was not happy that men and women were mingling so much. I don't know why she came to Canada after that. But
right. Yeah.
She struck me as a far righter, not someone who needed to be rallied around and given this kind of platform.
Right.
Just because Western far righters were opposing her too. I think there could have been better conversations done by the left rather than championing her and putting her on magazine covers and trying to normalize the niqab. It is perfectly reasonable to for a courtroom to want to see your face while you're swearing in. That's not an unreasonable demand.
Yeah.
So I think people that try to push that stuff, they need to be looked at carefully.
I guess that makes me think of the conversation surrounding Linda Sarsour and how some of the things that she has said in the past are actually kind of anti-left in a lot of ways.
Very, very much so. I view Linda Sarsour as sort of a Dave Rubin on the left. So you know how Dave Rubin sanitizes all these horrendous far-right figures. People that just should not be promoted in any way whatsoever. Rape apologists, anti-immigrants, white nationalist apologists, alt-righters, just disgusting people. Linda Sarsour very much does the flip of that, right? She'll apologize for some very disgusting religious preachers and imams and things like that. And people that the left should really not be associating with.
Right, yeah.
But I'm happy to criticize that end, and I'm also happy to criticize the Rubin end. What ends up happening in the atheist scene is that they only want to focus on Linda Sarsour, but they want to pat Dave Rubin on the back for doing essentially the same fucking thing.
Right, right.
In fact, what Dave does probably has more impact in the West because the far right is more powerful here, whereas the Islamist far right does not hold government positions, does not have Donald Trump saying they're fine people or whatever.
Right.
So
yeah.
I can't see how you can be intellectually honest, intellectually consistent, and hate on Linda Sarsour, but support Dave Rubin.
Yeah, when everybody was talking about Linda Sarsour, I was always kind of like, oh, I don't really know that much about her. And then I listened to your show where Thomas Smith was talking to
a Trump supporter.
Yeah, whose name I can't remember. But
Serene Cadosi.
There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I kind of came away from that going, well, I still don't know what I think about Linda Sarsour. So
yeah, I mean, it's possible because you don't know the kinds of people that she sanitizes.
Right.
So the impact of that is less obvious to you. But I mean, if you trust my judgment, trust me, she's no better than Dave Rubin.
She's no better. Yeah. No
better than Dave Rubin. But simultaneously, yes, a lot of the attacks on her are racist.
Right,
so,
right.
We cannot confuse the two things. Yes, there are many racists after Linda just because she's a Muslim-looking woman, but also she's also very problematic.
Yeah, it's almost like a lot of this stuff isn't just simple where we can just judge people based on one thing. We have to look at a broader context, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And certainly not on tribal alliances, right?
Right.
Oh, Linda Sarsour is a darling of the left, so she must be fine. Or,
right.
Racists are attacking her, so then, every attack on her, or every criticism of her must be racist. No, it's not that simple.
Yeah.
But that speaks to also why, you said why I speak about this topic more than anyone else is because when I came out of the Islam closet, the ex-Muslim closet, I was so happy and so free that there are other people out there like me. And it's so nice to have this movement that is, that has this noble goal of destigmatizing apostasy in Islam, which is perfectly fine. I think It's a great goal to have. But then when you start seeing the shifts and the politics that go much further than just Islam and become like anti-left and, allying with people who shit all over feminists, it's like it felt to me very much as if they wanted to replace one form of conservatism with another, which is not what I was about. So the fact that movement disappointed me so greatly, I think that's why I speak about it a lot, because it's been a personal shock to me.
No, that's fair. I think we're coming up on just about the time limit we had. Any final thoughts? Like, what do you think of do you think that we're making progress in this, getting people to be more thoughtful about their criticisms of Islam, or even their criticisms of the left? Are people making progress in this area, or is this just a never-ending fight?
I don't know. I mean, it seems that some leftist YouTubers are emerging and some leftist voices are emerging, so it's good. But the trend right now is to bash the left and just bash Islam in whatever incoherent way, and people will still applaud you. You can say, Islam is worse than Nazism, and people will be like, yay, without any thought as to what the impacts of such statements could be.
Yeah, that's that's fair.
So, I mean, I'll say that people on the left, please put more thought into it. Please be more vocal, because there's a lot of silent, leftist supporters, and it's always the hateful voices that are loudest. So if you find content creators whose nuances you appreciate, please vocally support them, at least. Yeah,
for sure. Share their content and whatnot.
Yes, exactly.
So I guess, where can people find your stuff?
You can find me on Twitter at Nicemangos, no E in mangoes, and you can find my podcast at soundcloud.com/polite conversations. And I also have a YouTube channel. You can look up Polite Conversations Podcast on YouTube and hit subscribe, because my channel has been, falsely flagged and shut down a couple of times. So I cannot get past a couple of thousand subscribers ever.
Oh, well, that still sounds like a lot to me, but but that's awesome. I'll definitely add links to the show notes for all of that stuff.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for joining me.
All right. Take care.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so that's the interview. Before I go, I just got a couple things to talk about. First, a little bit of listener feedback. On Patreon, listener Magnus said that with regards to our discussion about the Higgs boson, aka the God particle, the name originates from the title of a book by Nobel Prize winning physicist Leon M. Lederman. The book was given this title because the publisher wouldn't let us call it the goddamn particle, though that might be a more appropriate title given its villainous nature and the expense it is causing. So this is actually something I knew because I had watched a documentary about the Higgs boson a while back, and I remember them talking about this, but it apparently slipped my mind in the moment, and I really appreciate Magnus for his comment, their comment, and letting me know that this was the case. I'll make sure to mention it again next time we have the crew together. I also want to mention that Randy Lamonda has been saying nice things about us on Twitter again, and he really liked the rebroadcast of my interview with Alex Jules. As for Patreon stuff, we don't have any new patrons, and I really appreciate any support you can give the show. I know it's a long shot, but this is really my passion, and I'd love to be able to do it full time and stop doing these wacky, mood-altering, life-threatening shift work stuff. No pressure though. I want to give our top patrons a shout out. Thanks to Bassett, Lachlan, Daryl, Aaron, Lisa, Rob, and Positively Skeptical. You can join them and be a patron at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. I'll save any new reviews we get for the live show, but I also want to mention that we have a new store online to get some Brainstorm gear. It's at tpublic.com/stores/brainstorm-podcast-gear. There's a discount code right now until midnight on February 12th where you can get 20% off of your order. The code is HS2018. So that's when you do go to checkout, put in HS2018 and get 20% off of your discount at tpublic.com/stores/brainstorm-podcast-gear. We also have the GoFundMe for the Shift to Reason going on still, so check that out. You can find the information on the Shift to Reason Facebook page or there. For everything else, check out the show notes at thebrainstormpodcast.com and our website, brainstormblog.net. Thanks to our financial supporters, the Utah Outcasts, Bassett, Will, Aaron, Daryl, Destin Sucks, Lachlan, Lisa, Magnus, Michael, Nathan, Positively Skeptical, Rob, and Stephanie. If you want to join them and help the show grow, then you can do that at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. You can join us every second week when we broadcast live on brainstormradio.net. Our next show is on February 16th, and our guest will be Gleb Tsipursky, author of the Truth Seeker's Handbook and founder of the Pro-Truth Pledge. I'll try very hard to get those episodes out before I leave for Vegas. Thank you to Eiynah for joining me. You can find her blog at nicemangos.blogspot.com, as well as following her on Twitter at Nicemangos, no Ian Mangos, and a variety of other places, the links all of which will be on thebrainstormpodcast.com and hopefully eventually on brainstormblog.net. Thanks to Dave for our intro music. Thanks to Alex Kepper-Murdoch for doing the voiceover for the intro and some of our ads. And thanks to Jason Camo for our outro music. You can find his stuff over at aloststateofmind.com. Whew. All music played is either with permission or under the SOCAN license to play. For more information on SOCAN, you can check out the music license info page on our website, brainstormblog.net. Remember to give us a rating, a thumbs up, or a fave on your podcatcher of choice. Join our Facebook group, like our page, follow us on Twitter, share the show, and spread the word. Thanks for listening, and remember, the truth matters.
This is an opinion-based podcast. Each person on the podcast is responsible for their own opinions, and those opinions don't necessarily reflect the views of the rest of the panel. Any guests or anyone associated with the people on the podcast, such as spouses, partners, children, other family members, friends, or employers. No one person speaks for the podcast with the possible exception of Corey, and he doesn't speak for anyone else on the show. The Brainstorm podcast does not represent the views of our sponsors.
We just wanted to say thanks to everyone who listens to us, shares the show, gives us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or supports us through Patron and Gumroad. We don't have a lot of interactions with our listeners, but what we have had proves that we attract some of the best people around. Smart, kind, and cool. An audience truly worthy of the titles hardcore and woo-free. Thanks for helping us make the world a smarter place.